Hello, everyone. Welcome to the WSBA's Crypto Roundup for Friday, July 17th, 2026. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts, David Brill and Joshua Ashley Klayman. It's good to see you both. Before we begin, for everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us on YouTube, on LinkedIn Live, on X. If you've got questions for David or Joshua, please put them in the chat. And obviously, our usual disclaimers. Nothing we're discussing is any sort of investment or legal advice, and really the discussions are our own personal opinions, not necessarily the opinions of our respective organizations. David, Josh, summer is well underway. We've got smoke from wildfires all over the place. Markets started getting some traction, David, and then sort of didn't. And clarity is still being debated. David, you and I chatted in the virtual green room. I would never wager you, David, but what's going on with clarity?
Oh, that's a good question. I think everybody wants some clarity. Well, the prediction markets have gotten more bearish on clarity, but the new text of the bill is set to be released today. And I think we'll get a good sense of what the compromises are and what the latest ethics compromise is. And I think the question is, can we find seven Democrats to support the bill to get it passed?
Yeah. Josh, weigh in on this, because we talk about clarity in our legal working group, and shout out to Adam Goldberg. He gives us our policy updates often. Josh, what are you hearing?
So I've heard a number of things. In fact, I'm currently searching from my notes that I took on what I most recently heard. Here they are. So all of this is unsubstantiated rumor. Okay, so all caveats apply. 10,000 pinches of salt. My understanding is that at this point, one of the things that some are trying to include, which others believe is unlikely to make it into the final version, is prediction markets. And that actually is, something that is causing, at least temporarily, a little bit of drag, because people are saying, look, prediction markets are becoming more and more important. We need to address them. But others are saying, not now, not here. We've been working on this a while, later. I think some of the other pieces that are still being considered right now, the ethics piece, obviously, I think there are still talks about that. And also some of the Title VI language is, my understanding, is still being addressed as different agencies reconcile whether they're on the same page. I think also I've heard that some of the provisions, like the ag provisions, are still not finalized. And our industry is now weighing in on those provisions, including about things like vertical integration, et cetera. This is something where this has been in place. Some of these things were agreed months ago, and so people haven't been focusing on them. But my understanding is that there is a real push to get to yes by the end of July, and that everyone is trying to push in the same direction.
Yep.
I have probed around a little to see, is there a true drop dead date? And I've been told that really, in terms of a real drop dead date, the real drop dead date is the end of the year. It's possible something could pass in September or a lame duck by the end of the year, but I think the idea is that they want to get a yes by the end of July, just because this has been worked on so much and the subject of so much attention. So,
Josh, thanks so much. By the way, David, you and I know when she says she poked around, it's calling senators and Congress people in DC. All kidding aside, I want to address Greg Murphy, our friend up in Toronto, WSBA members. I shouldn't have said smoke, Greg. I'm sorry to make you worry. It's more like haze or smog. And I can't speak to Michigan lawmakers. You both know my opinion on some politicians. David, let's come back to this because I think it's important as well. You and I have had this conversation offline. We've had these at our working group sessions as well. And I'm almost hesitant to ask, but David, how much of what's going on with clarity is the politics of these conversations?
Well, I think unfortunately, we have a very critical midterm election coming up. And, I do think that there is still some hesitancy to have a major legislative win happen before the midterms. And, I do think that has something to come to do with it. And then unfortunately, you have some Democrats who've been vociferously coming out against it. I think Elizabeth Warren, Chris Van Hollen, and one other Democratic senator had a meeting, and they were, saying how it's corrupt and this and that. And so, my hope is that, cooler heads prevail, and that, we can meet in the middle and get something passed. I'm going to take a little different approach than Josh. In my view, if we don't get it passed by the August recess, I think it may be difficult to get it passed, after the midterm election, especially if any of if the Senate flips or the House flips. I think it becomes more difficult because I don't think there's going to be a reason for the Dems to sort of move to the middle on some of this if they feel like they're going to be taking over the Senate, 2 months later.
And
Go ahead.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
if I can redeem myself, I wasn't saying that I think that that's going to be like a winner. I just mean like I had been saying, wait, I keep hearing it's drop dead, drop dead, drop dead, drop dead. Like, where is the drop dead? Is there a drop dead? And so someone said, well, technically it would be the end of the year. But I agree that I have two minds. Like, on one hand, I want to say if we don't get it soon, we're not going to get it so that people get it soon. But then if we don't get it soon, I don't want it to be given up on. So yeah, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth.
No, but Josh, it raises a point because we've been hearing drop dead date since January of this year. So, is there an actual drop dead date, or is that just a placeholder phrase? Josh, let's stick with you on this. And David, I want to reach out a little bit on something, and the reason I bring up politics, shout out to Renato Mariotti, a member from Paul Hastings. Josh, David, you both know that he did a really wonderful webinar on some of the state issues that are happening in Illinois, really putting forward as law a tax that is, for crypto supporters, egregious. And he has some very candid commentary about it. But it brings me back to the politics of it. We keep talking about the midterm. David, is this also a presidential election 2028 conversation? I would have thought we'd be beyond that, but it doesn't seem we are.
I think, Ron, that I don't think this will be a big conversation in 2028 if it gets passed. If it doesn't get passed, I think there's so many fundamental issues going on in our country right now that I think this will be an issue important to like the crypto pack and fair shake, and I think money will be deployed accordingly. I don't know how big it will be of an issue because I think fundamentally the views of both parties are very, very different right now, and I think those big picture views will be in focus. But I do think that PAC money will certainly support candidates in 28 that support our industry. And one thing I do want to say is I do think there will be a bit of a reckoning if we don't get this bill passed as far as where contributions go for the midterms. And so I do think if we get a vote in August and it's not passed, I think that senators or representatives who are supported by Fair Shake and other PACs may, see that support change if it's not approved.
Yeah. Josh, do you agree?
I agree. I hesitate to disagree with David Brill's crystal ball.
We all do. Everyone hesitates to disagree with David.
By the way, guys, what is happening? I have to say, the turn of phrase of the dead cat bounce, but bump. I mean, it's pretty great, but like, is that what we saw? Is that what we're seeing? Like,
man,
tell us it's not a dead cat. Tell us it's not a dead cat.
She basically told us to move on, David.
Yeah.
David, tell the non-Wall Street people what a dead cat bounce is.
So a dead cat bounces in a bear market when you have a bullish uptrend and people think that, we're getting out of the bear market or we're getting out of a correction, but it's really just a head fake where prices go up for a very short period of time, catch people in, and then they go back down. And so I think the big question is, and we're in a fascinating point of time right now because we get CPI that is much lower than expected. But then on the flip side, things are heating up back in Iran again. and the Middle East. So those energy gains we saw in 1 month, we may lose them next month. So I think we're in a really tricky position right now.
David, Josh, I'll weigh in on that a little bit. And for the record, I assume the Klayman family office has been saying dead cat bounce for the past week. But Josh, David, David, I'm with you on the perspective on prices, but I do have a couple of thoughts there. And you point to something that's really interesting to me. You're absolutely right. When it looked like geopolitical issues were sort of dying down, whatever your politics are, oil started to drop. We began to see a smoothing out in some price fluctuations. We began to see the VIX move below 16, David, I think at one point. And no sooner do we get relatively cooler CPI data, things flare up again. This brings me to a fundamental conversation, David, you and I have had many times, which is it's not the data, it's the revisions, and none of it is smooth plotting data. So it really makes it a difficult conversation about where will prices go, because next month's energy, or PCE, for example, will be higher. It certainly will be. And it makes me wonder, is a maturing crypto market responding to that? David, bear with me. And the reason I'm saying this is, given all of the news, BTC should be below 60, I'd argue. You and I have talked about a floor at 50. We're at 63. So is this a wager on things calming down later in the year?
I still think we're headed down lower.
Based on what? Based on options info? Or?
I just think that based on sentiment, based on, I think inflation will go back up next month. I think that, we have to see how much longer this tech sell-off goes. Because if you look at what happened, we had some momentum, and then all of a sudden the semiconductor stocks keep selling off. ETH fell like 4%, Bitcoin's around 63. So I think we've been in a channel. We hit the sort of top end of the channel, hit resistance, and now we're coming back to the middle of the channel.
Mm-hmm.
So also, let's not forget that we used to say, sell in May and go away.
Yeah, fair.
There's still some folks who are selling in May and going away, even though our crypto markets are 24/7. So, but I do want to show some positivity that ETH inflows, were 97 million this week. And it really was all entirely in the BlackRock funds. So I think you're seeing like an institutional buy that's going on regardless of these, swings in sentiment and swings in, CPI. So I do think that is a really good signal, but I do think we have a little further to go before we bottom out.
David, thanks so much. Just shout out again to Greg. I haven't seen the article yet, CNBC on Clarity just now. We'll have to give it a review. That's the problem with this market, David and Josh. By the time we're done broadcasting, there's going to be new news. But let's ask this question, and I ask it of both of you, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Let's make a presumption that Clarity passes.
Yeah.
Whatever the drop date is. David, Josh, is that a parabolic move for BTC and the big cryptos? I'm not asking you to price predict, but I'm talking about a momentum.
I think it is a momentum increase in actual building and actual work that's being done and products being built and shipped. I think it will take a little time for the price to catch up to it. I do think it is bullish. I actually think it's more bullish for altcoins and the coins that don't have clarity on their legal status than it is for Bitcoin and ETH.
We're back to alts, Josh. He definitely wants to talk alts. David, go for it.
Well, look, I think, there's certain cryptos that can trade on exchanges right now or unregulated exchanges right now.
Yep.
But there are others that are still, it's unclear, and some institutions are hesitant to list them or to have them trade on their platforms. So I think if we did get regulatory clarity on what their status is, that would go a long way to creating more liquidity and more opportunities for people to buy certain altcoins on traditional registered exchanges.
David, is that what's also holding back retail using, and I'm thinking of Charles Schwab, for example, I'm thinking of Morgan Stanley and E-Trade. Are we seeing volume there yet, or is all of this in sort of a holding pattern?
Well, I mean, look, I think we're seeing volume in Bitcoin and ETH, but all these other tokens aren't being sold on those platforms. So, besides Robinhood and Coinbase. So I think, you still have a more limited set of retail users who are using traditional exchanges to access crypto. But I think the retail user has been pretty burned, unfortunately. The retail buyer has been pretty burned, and I think they're going to be waiting. Unfortunately, when they're buying, usually institutions are selling, but I think they're going to miss a fair amount of the rally, watching the institutions sort of make their moves before they get involved.
David, let me ask you this, and Josh, weigh in. I'm with you, David, but did they get burned or did they rotate out of crypto for prediction markets?
Well, I mean, there's been an obvious rotation out of crypto for prediction markets, and look, prediction markets are so interesting. There's so many things that you can, bet on, and sports betting, and so I think that alpha and that fast money has really gone into prediction markets, and I don't think it's going to leave prediction markets anytime soon because now you have perp trading on Coinbase and you have it on Kalshi. And so I think a lot of that trading is going to stay on the prediction markets and in AI.
Yeah, David, for the audience who may not know, just describe perp trading real quickly.
It's just the idea of it's really options trading, but just without necessarily an end date. It just sort of perpetually rolls over. And obviously you're paying interest depending on your positions, but it's not something that immediately closes out like a dated option like for today. So that's one main difference. And so, but I do want to make one other point that we talked about before. I think that, one of the challenges is that I think ETH and Bitcoin are acting as risk assets and not as a store of value. And I think that the trading and the volatility is really, it's not a store of value behaving like a store of value. It's really a risk asset behaving like a risk asset. And that's why I think we're seeing a lot of the volatility right now.
David, is it a risk asset or is it a kind of indicator of liquidity or interest rate movements?
Well, I think it's definitely an indicator of liquidity and interest rate movements, but I think ultimately the store of value narrative is sort of evolving. Yeah. And I think there's a segment that looks at it as a store of value and a segment that looks at it as a risk asset. And I think we talked about this before, and I think this happened in 2020 when, the Ukraine-Russia conflict started. We talked about, you have wars, you have these big geopolitical events, and people don't want to always be in risk assets, and you see liquidity being pulled out of it.
Yeah. Josh, is the Klayman family office in the prediction markets? Watchers, viewers need to know.
So I am. My family office is not in the prediction markets. I'm still relying, as I've noted, on David's crystal ball and the prep texts that provide me with great knowledge that I would never have otherwise. But that being said, I mean, for fun, yes, I think they're very, very cool. But no, do I have investments in prediction markets? No, I don't. For anyone who's wondering at home, but
exactly. But oh, go ahead, Josh. I want to add something when you're done.
Sure. I just wanted, this was on the other point that Ron had mentioned about asking what happens post clarity, in terms of, is there a bounce or whatever there is. So you may have seen my eyes going to the side. And part of it was I was looking up this article that I had seen that Tanya Evans put out yesterday on Forbes. It says the Clarity Act delay is now a compliance problem, not just a political one. That's a Forbes article. I think this is so true because I think there are so many companies, large companies, teams, other things, who are kind of if you're kind of thinking back, you guys might not have done this when you were younger, but if you ever jumped rope, where someone's twirling on the side, and if you're anything like me, some people jump in, they're really good, and I'd be waiting to see when I can jump in. And I feel like that's how a lot of clients and others are approaching things. They're okay, great. There's going to be this Clarity Act. Okay, great. We're going to come in, but we don't yet know what it's going to say. And even though we might, for all material purposes, know basically what it's going to say, yep. Other than on the edges and things like that. And so I do think there's a lot of activity. To David's point, there's a lot of activity, not just in the digital natives and the alts and things like that, but also really across the board now that digital assets have become more, dare I say, mainstream. But David, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think a big tell as far as the Clarity Act, and if we think we'll get the 60 votes, is if we see one Democratic senator come out in support of the bill, especially after the text gets released today. I think that will be a big tell for us. If somebody comes out and says they're on board with the revised text, I think that's going to be a big tell, and that's what I would be looking for if you're following it.
Yep.
I think I want to build on one of Josh's points too.
Yeah,
Ron. Sorry, I interrupted you. I've worked with a lot of compliance departments and working on helping them refine their policies and procedures. And I know that sounds like super exciting to some folks, but for us lawyers, I think we need certainty so that the compliance folks in these big institutions have certainty on what the policies and procedures look like so that they can roll out the products. And I think, like Josh was saying, until they have certainty on what the language looks like, it's harder for them to do their jobs, to line up the policies and procedures that these regulated entities have when they want to roll out products. So that's another reason why we need clarity.
David, Josh, good point. And I am going to propose the jump rope competition for both of you. Whether or not the jump rope challenge, Josh, whether or not clarity passes. I have never jumped a rope, and I'm pretty sure I'd break a leg if I did. David, Josh, I want to come back to clarity a little bit in a different context, and I'm really grateful for all of the perspective. But we've talked about this as well. And David, I'm with you on sort of this reticence to move forward unless clarity has passed, these concerns about what those guardrails will look like. Josh, let's start with you. We've talked about regulators not necessarily creating clarity, but at least creating a framework by which participants in the space might get a little more comfort, right? And they certainly, SEC has been very active. CFTC has been very active. We see PCAOB and Treasury and the others. Is that enough, Josh, for the industry to continue to evolve and move forward in the absence of clarity passing?
I mean, I think it's going to have to be enough, right? If it doesn't pass, we're going to have to, otherwise, what's the alternative? The industry doesn't move forward, or we wait for court decisions or something like that.
Or the next election.
Yeah, exactly. So I think assuming that we have, there have been major investments made, as you guys all know, and as we've talked about on here and otherwise, people have invested in the space. And by people, I mean institutions in addition to individuals. And so I think it's going to have to be enough. Is it ideal? No. But is it going to, the alternative is what? Everything stops, everything, nothing happens. What I would say is, we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of Genius, which, wow, time flies.
Yeah.
But also, we've seen some of the implementing rules and proposed rules and things like that roll out. And I think that's a good kind of, some people have asked, well, what's going to happen after clarity passes? We'll still need implementation, but luckily we're getting a lot of it sort of on the front end. So it's not like there's a magic wand and suddenly everything is clear. As we've talked about, some things like the Howey test, guess what? We're still going to have to figure out if there's an investment contract and things like that.
And Josh, you've said this many times, despite everything we've talked about for clarity and what's happening in the States, builders keep building, and they're not building for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. May I just say one more thing? I think this is one of the things, aside from, certainty over time and sustaining challenges in court and otherwise, or new administrations. Yeah. I think, to the extent that we as a country want to say that crypto is important, having laws, that are addressing these issues at the federal level, I think is important. What does it say about us if we don't have that?
That's a really good point. And David, let me add one thing to this, ripping up the script a little bit. To as a follow-on to Josh's point, is waiting for clarity why we don't have an innovation exemption from the SEC?
I think they're working in sort of concurrent paths, but I don't think this is the right time. Maybe the SEC doesn't feel like this is the right time to put that out until there is clarity on clarity. And I said that on purpose.
Yeah.
But I think maybe that they're like refining their idea of what the innovation exemption looks like. But I mean, we have seen, what their idea about raising capital looks like and the exemptions for that. So I do think that's a positive sign.
Yeah. And go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, like, thinking about this, and I don't mean this the way it's going to sound. I mean it a little bit like how it's going to sound, but not entirely. So, like, when I keep hearing waiting for clarity, waiting for clarity, waiting for clarity, I fear that it's a little bit like waiting for Godot, right? like, will it ever arrive? And yet at the same time, we are not in the same position.
Yeah.
I guess this is an optimistic take. We're not in the same position in terms of lack of clarity that we were when this push began, right? When we were back with, the Lummis-Gillibrand Act back in the day, or then later Fit 21 and the DCCPA, all these sorts of things that have led us to now. We have gotten increasing clarity in many different ways. So it's not, the situation isn't as dire. It's more like we're just missing out as a country if we can't get this together.
Yeah. David, are we still 4 years behind schedule in your mind based on Josh's comment? It feels like we've made progress, but
well, look, I think the fact that we've had we've been fortunate enough to be invited to have meetings with the SEC task force, with the CFTC task force, shows that we are making some headway. But I do think we are still behind. Like, those 4 years that we lost, we're still catching up to that. And I think that on the regulatory side, we're catching up faster than the legislative side. And then on the judiciary side, I think the jury's still out a little bit, but I think because the cases finally, like, the law started shifting on some of the cases that the SEC was bringing, and they lost a number of cases. I think that on the judiciary side, we're in a somewhat better place, but I do worry with some of these class action cases that do we see some case law where different tokens are viewed as securities, and then we see securities liabilities for those cases.
Josh, did you notice that David brought up SEC, and over the years, the same thing happens? An alarm goes off someplace in the background.
Yep.
It is uncanny. Josh, years, that same thing happens. David, Josh, thank you both so much. I know we're on limited time. David's got the Gulf Stream, Josh, fueling up somewhere down in Florida. There are a couple of things I wanted to raise as well. I would love you to give us some thoughts on this. One is, the context of all of these conversations, a lot of our week actually is about tokenization. And you've probably both seen this kind of rapidly evolving tokenization of financial markets and Wall Street. And in the news, David, DTCC going into production, limited production, but production on tokenized equities, tokenized ETFs, tokenized treasuries. You don't get a more standard Wall Street financial markets plumbing organization than DTCC. David, is this the future of global financial markets?
Yes, I do think so. And it's great that we're talking about this, because DTCC completed its first live tokenized securities trades this week quietly. So while everyone was watching Bitcoin give back its CPI gains, the post-trade infrastructure of global finance, executed blockchain-based securities settlement for the first time in history. So I think this is the most consequential event in the week for the long-term trajectory of the industry. And one thing I like to say when we're talking broader is that price action is noise and infrastructure is signal. And so that's the way I've been thinking about it.
David, really well put. Josh, are you seeing the same thing? And one thing I want to add to that, Josh, that I'd love your opinion on. For a long time, the technology behind crypto and blockchain proponents, and I'll call them originalists, I don't want to use some of the phrases for them, have been financial markets are going away. It's time to disrupt Wall Street. It's time to disrupt banks. They're dinosaurs. Josh, that's not turning out to be true.
It's not turning out to be true at all. In fact, I mean, I think if we look at this DTCC, these developments, there are, and if we look more broadly at the Canton Network, right? Which is
Right.
digital assets baby, right? Look at all these players somehow involved, right? It is the big names, right? The big banks, the big asset managers, um, intermediaries, right?
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that now that we've gotten to this era of tokenization, let me think about how I want to say this, because I mean this solely in a positive way, and
Yep.
I want to just be mindful of how I say it. But when we think about who would be involved with tokenization and all the possibilities, with different digital native teams, blockchain teams, things like that, and I
Yep.
think back, like when we think of Canton and digital asset, I think back to Blythe Masters, right?
Wow. Yes.
And so it's interesting how everything kind of comes around, right?
Yeah.
In its own way, and that the blockchain that is really being relied on for a lot of this stuff actually um, relates to a company that was from someone who
A
left
decade ago.
TradFi.
A decade ago or so, I think, Josh.
At least a decade ago. I have to look this up. But
So,
yeah,
Josh.
I'm not sure. I don't recall exactly when. Oh, she founded it in 2014.
Yeah.
And,
12
Blythe
years.
Masters, as you guys know, was formerly at GPM.
Yeah. Josh, really well put. And David, it makes me ask a fundamental question. And I'm going to throw out my personal opinion here on something. As a concept, decentralized finance, David, seems, despite the challenges, and I know there are numerous challenges, there's a sort of elegance to the decentralization of it. But the more that we're seeing centralized intermediaries building out, it really lends credence to A16Z Crypto's article recently that Wall Street, and I'm paraphrasing, doesn't want DeFi, it just wants blockchain. David, is there a middle ground, or will we never get to decentralization?
Well, I think it's really, well, first of all, I think we've talked about for years how the innovation that we had in DeFi and in crypto generally was going to be integrated into the mainstream markets. And so now we're just seeing the actualization of that.
Yeah.
So like think about, going from T+2 to T+1. Think about, making transactions more seamless, freeing up collateral by having tokenized deposits or different tokenization projects. So I think the bottom line is that in our country, we can't get to truly decentralized markets because you always have to have someone who's responsible. And so I think that we're going to get some of the benefits of tokenization and DeFi in our regulated markets, but our regulated exchanges, the one that sells stocks and the ones that sell other, equities and commodity products are always going to be centralized in some way. So the question is, can decentralized markets compete with centralized exchanges that are incorporating the best elements of, or some of the best elements of decentralization?
Yeah, it's a good point. Josh, David, we're soon out of time. I want to raise one provocative comment. Josh, tell me if you agree. This is directed at David. My hypothesis is Robinhood Chain will resurrect the alts and meme coins for David. David, am I wrong?
For David?
I mean, for David particularly, I suspect he's already on Robinhood Chain. No, all kidding aside, David, Josh, Robinhood Chain and this idea of what it's trying to accomplish, what are your thoughts about that kind of go-to-market strategy for Robinhood?
I mean, I think it's great. I think the more, centralized exchanges, or the more we see different blockchains being utilized, and Robinhood Chain is using, I believe, Ethereum. I mean, I think it's great. Look, when Bitcoin starts going up again, we're going to see another wave of the meme coin rally. It may look different, but we will see another wave of that. I think fundamentally, and I think it's something like we all need to rally around, is that, look, DeFi is really important, and I think people will continue to use DeFi. But for our altcoins and for these other projects, we need to find a way to show value. What are these altcoins worth? What are they producing? What revenue are they producing? I think we've got to move out of the ideation stage and into the revenue generating stage.
What's the use case, which you've often said? And to be clear, just as a follow-up to Josh's comment, I did not mean to imply for everyone in the audience that Robinhood Chain was created for David. I don't mean to put him on the spot. Thank you for calling that out, Josh.
I was just teasing. But so I do have a one thing just to mention. And speaking of Robinhood Chain, it's been described, I think, as being AI native. And I think more and more we're seeing AI native. And what I'm taking from that in terms of an AI native network is really, a network, a blockchain that's built for purpose, built specifically for example, AI agents to transact autonomously with each other and without necessarily having human intervention. Is that the new buzzword, or is this fundamentally different? Is this like how much of this is truly meaningful, and how much of this is not? Thoughts? Not specific to Robinhood Chain, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, David, Josh, I'll weigh in with a personal opinion. I love the idea of agentic transactions being enabled. At this point, it still strikes me that so much can go wrong if agentic transactions aren't engineered properly. And Josh, David, from a legal perspective, we're going to talk about agents and agency. What are the legal ramifications of an agent that is an AI agent doing transactions for you? I don't think anyone's thought about those questions. I mean, I'm sure someone's thought about those questions. I don't think we have answers for them.
Well, I think a lot of people have been thinking about those questions.
Rephrase that.
I know Josh and I have been thinking about them, and I'm sure you've been thinking about them in sort of the broader picture.
Yep.
I do want to bring up one interesting thing about Robinhood Chain, because Robinhood Chain was really built for tokenized stocks and the trading of tokenized stocks. But lo and behold, meme coins took over. Yep. So it's just so interesting how these things play out. And the utility really runs across both, stocks and crypto. So, I think that's really like the fascinating part, and I was just looking and doing a little research while we were talking. Like meme coins like Cashcat are dominating, activity on Robinhood Chain. And so even though Robinhood built it for Wall Street, the crypto folks have stepped in and are using it for things that they like to use it for. So,
and David, to that point, Vlad Tenev, the CEO of Robinhood, came out and said they're great for memes as well. And Cashcat was the original name, I believe, of Robinhood, David.
I did not know that.
Cashcat?
Cashcat was what it was
Cat
originally.
bounce?
I don't think dead cat bounce.
But alive.
I think we're pulling the cat example way too far, but I think Cashcat, someone out in the audience, correct me if I'm wrong, was the name of the business they had started, I believe, before it evolved into Robinhood.
So interesting. When did they do that? Like, because think back to Crypto Kitties, just staying on the cat theme.
Jeez, do you have a cat? I just need to, like.
So I do. In fact, I have 2.
There you go.
But I also have a dog and 3 guinea pigs.
Wow.
Josh wanted to make sure she wasn't just a cat baby.
Yes, that is exactly what I was trying to make clear.
The Noah's Ark that is Josh's house at this point.
I do want to add that Robinhood is having a 90-day gas subsidy. So it'll be interesting to see. It will be interesting to see how it trades after that 90-day gas subsidy.
All right, I got to do AI programming and get some stuff going.
They did have more transactions on Robinhood Chain than on Base. And so that was interesting also. Yeah.
David, Josh, I feel like there's more to cover, but we're at time. David, you're heading out. Where are you headed, David? What's going on this week?
I am headed to Scottsdale for a little vacation.
Nice.
Of course, when somebody goes from Florida right to the desert, you might have thought, I should have gone like all the way to the West Coast, but I'll be out in the desert. I'm going to do a little off-roading and spend time with some family out there. And we'll see who wins the World Cup on Sunday.
Very nice. Josh, how about you?
Me? Well, I have one of my children has a birthday coming up on Monday. So, yeah. Actually, I should say this. So, on July 20th, it is one of my children's 13th birthday. It is one of my brother's 75th birthdays. And my father would have been 100, all on July 20th. Isn't that interesting?
Big day.
And I had a former stepsister who also had that birthday. So it's a very strange thing.
That is an interesting series of coincidences. And happy birthday to your daughter, by the way.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, she's looking forward to becoming a teenager.
Oh, we all remember the
teenage
teenage so long ago. David, Josh, I just want to throw out a couple of shout outs. And again, for everyone who watched, thank you so much for watching this. If we missed any questions, info@WSBA.co. We just launched our AI and quantum working group as well. Josh is a part of that. If you're interested, again, info@WSBA.co. It'd be great to have you. We've got some great speakers. Josh, we've got prompt engineering sessions coming up for our AI and quantum working group. So we will figure out a way to make sure we can carve out the time on your calendar. Everyone, thank you so much and have a great weekend. We'll leave it there. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.